It's 5:15. I'd like to call this special meeting to order. Before we get started here, we have one. We can do the pledge first. Stand and recite the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. First, we'd have Aaron Lamp for public comments.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Lamp. I live at 821 18th Street Southeast in Jamestown. I have two sons who attend JHS, a freshman and a senior. I'm here tonight to share my thoughts about the current instructional plan and ideas for the future. Currently, I'm a financial advisor, but I'm also a former high school math teacher. I bring my personal perspective as a parent, but also as a former teacher. I think we can all agree that this year is unlike any we've ever experienced in our lifetime. But I think we can also agree that our focus, like every year, is the same: the educational opportunity and physical and emotional well-being of our students, teachers, and faculty. I believe our state and school district in particular did an amazing job in March adjusting at light speed to the situation we were faced with. Making sure that each student in our district was equipped with online distance learning was a priority, and I'm impressed with how we were able to accomplish that. It became clear over the summer that at least the start of the year was going to look much different than before. Decisions were made with the best of intentions. 2 days of school for each cohort was anticipated to be our best attempt at keeping our kids and faculty safe while providing as much face-to-face instruction as possible. I can speculate that 90-minute class periods were chosen to try and lessen the contact between kids as they move from one class to the other. When the decision was announced that we were going back to school 5 days face-to-face, I think that at that time our district had data that 2 days a week was working when we consider the physical well-being of our kids and faculty. Very little to no transmission during the school day between students or faculty. I think we can all agree that striving for zero transmission wasn't necessarily a goal or even a realistic expectation, but that's almost what we accomplished. Since that announcement, things in North Dakota and Stutsman County have changed quite a bit. I would guess that's why we're here tonight. I completely understand why this is under review. I understand why we will be discussing the option of staying in our current instruction plan due to the county and state risk level. What I want to talk about is how we can make this current structure better if that's where we stay. At first, when you think about 90-minute class periods for our students, it makes sense to the limiting of passing of the kids between the halls. But things have changed since that plan was developed. Now, as long as each student is wearing a mask, there's no close contact quarantine. Passing in the hallway, as long as the students are wearing masks, doesn't create as big of an issue as it did when we started the school year. My suggestion, if we need to stay in 2 days a week per cohort, would be go to 7 class periods per day. A 90-minute class period is long for everyone, even adults. At best, we are asking our students to do 2 90-minute classes with a 5-minute break twice. Or at worst, if you eat lunch at 10 a.m., you have 3 90-minute classes in a row with only a 5-minute break in between. To compound that problem, especially with some of the upper-level classes, if you're only meeting face-to-face 1 time per week, many of these teachers have to administer a test. Some of our students are coming to school with 2 to 4 tests in 1 day. With at least a test a week, if not every other week, that leaves little time for actual face-to-face instruction. If we had 7 periods a day, it would give teachers opportunity to administer a test on 1 day and still have a day for face-to-face instruction. My one question is why we aren't maximizing the work that was done in the spring when every student was set up with internet capabilities and a computer and utilizing technology like Zoom. I know that other school districts that are much larger than ours are utilizing that. If we have cohorts in school 2 days a week and Zoom 2 days a week that they're not in class, that would give up to 4 days of instruction. I know this would create some scheduling problems because there still be test days and some classes have labs, but with other classes it would give 3 to 4 days of instruction opportunity. Or maybe when everyone's home on Wednesday, they have a regular day of instruction and everyone is on Zoom. When I was a teacher, I know that many of my students would come to school with the same question from the previous day's homework. I can only imagine teachers now are spending a lot of time answering the same question via email. This might help with that. I think exploring the option of utilizing technology we already have would also benefit the kids that are home for 10 days because they have COVID or 14 because of close contact. Right now, they're getting no face-to-face. If we have Zoom set up, at least they can attend Zoom when they're feeling well enough. Remembering that some of these kids are coming off quarantine will have 2 to 3 tests to make up and maybe 3 to 5 of their classes, and they have to teach all of the material to themselves. There might be a possibility of teachers teaching via Zoom if they're quarantined because of close contact and are not sick. I know the class would still need a supervisor, but at least kids would receive some instruction from the teacher. All I know is we know so much more than we did in July. When discussing what the future of our instructional plan looks like with COVID spiking, I'm sure that you're taking that into consideration. We know the amount of students in quarantine are spiking too. If anyone is like me, when the school year started, I was hoping 2 days a week for school was only temporary, but reality, it might not be temporary. If it isn't, we need to improve on the current plan because I believe it can be more effective. I cannot imagine this would not be better for our students educationally. Physically, with what we know, I cannot imagine that going to 7 periods per day would significantly increase the transmission rate in school. But emotionally, these kids need school. They need a schedule. Going to 7 periods will get them in front of their teacher 2 times a week, but adding Zoom into our plan will not only give them a schedule, but it will also give those kids in quarantine some live instruction. I personally would like to know that our instructional plan is fluid, more fluid than changing every 11 to 12 weeks. If our county's risk rate drops, I would like to know that it wouldn't take 5 weeks to change our plan. I know that changing our plan takes work on the back end, especially for the teachers. But if we're in class 2 days and on Zoom 2 days a week, if our county's level drops, it might be more fluid to change to 4 days a week. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Moving on to our agenda here, we have the instructional plan determination. Rob?
Did you want to announce that you have some board members that aren't here, but they're...
There's 3 board members that are not here, but they are on phone, so they're hearing what we're talking about and going to be on the conversation. So, Rob.
Thank you. I have a presentation that I think is important that we'll walk through to provide appropriate context before we get into recommendations. So, very quickly, just to outline the purpose of what I'm doing, like I said, I think it's really critical that we look at context and we look at our current landscape in the school setting related to our recommendation and our COVID response. I think without this context, it's easy to look at escalating numbers and changing risk designations as a county and as a community, and it can seem counterintuitive to what we see in school. So I think it's important to lay the foundation for what actually exists in our school before we have a recommendation and have those discussions. As I've said many times, any institution is going to be a reflection of our community. And because we operate with strict mitigation strategies to control that spread and to limit the impact, we see different results than what the general population might see and what we see in our county, but we're still impacted. We just might see it in a slightly different way or a slightly a more minimal way. I've created a few different videos that are on our district's update center that if you have not had a chance to look at those, I encourage you to do that. One gives outlines the process of what our administrators do for the investigatory process and how we track what we see in schools. So you have a great deal of understanding in terms of the great work that they do and the very robust data that we have when we make these recommendations, and when I show you the data that we do have, that it's pretty robust. The second is really kind of similar to this presentation. It was done based on November 6th data. So it's similar to this. I'll include an instructional plan recommendation later and some health and safety plan changes that would need to be done as well. But you can find those both on, like I said, on our district's update center, and I would encourage anybody to watch those because I think it is they're important pieces to the puzzle. So as part of this presentation, I want to provide examples of the tables that we have begun to share, what all those categories mean, the definitions, what we're looking for, It's really important to us that we want to make sure we protect individual privacy as we report data. We want to be sure that it is on the aggregate and not able to be drilled down to the private. We want to make sure that our students and staff maintain that individual privacy that they need. So I'm going to provide updated tables as of this morning at 7 a.m. And then I will last include a recommendation to our school board from our instructional plan review team, and then some corresponding health and safety plan revisions that would need to take place as well if you are to approve that recommendation. So this is what the reporting tables look like. Maybe the only thing to point out on this table or on this slide is we're looking at a building enrollment that's 2,104 students. So that doesn't include any of our JVA students. These are only the students within the four walls. And then total regular in-school staff, that is total regular staff. It's not substitute teachers. It isn't those that just are employed for an extracurricular or something like that. It is regular in-school staff. So that's where we get that 2,104 and that 353. So the first one, probably the easiest one, is positives. Represents the number of staff and students that are currently out due to a positive designation. I will say that this is not the number of staff and students that have become positive during the school day or have even necessarily been to school while positive. It's just the number that are currently out of school and have that designation. For example, that can include somebody that's been a household contact for a number of days, tested or began to be symptomatic, tested, was positive. That person would be represented in our positive, even though they were likely never in school during any kind of exposure window. But we track all positives, so that's the number that you would see. So in terms of close contact quarantines, these are the number of students and staff who have been within 6 feet for 15 minutes of a positive case, while either one or both of the parties were unmasked or were not wearing masks properly. This includes instances outside of the school day, inside of the regular school day, and during activities. Because we require masks in school, the bulk of in-school close contact quarantines result from a few different areas. Recess for our elementary students, lunch is one that we see fairly significantly, and then activities for middle school and high school students. So these are students who would need to quarantine from school for 14 days from the onset of symptoms of the positive case or from the date of the positive test, whichever is first. Close contact exempt are the total number of staff and students who were within 6 feet of a positive case for 15 minutes while both parties were properly masked. That's what you heard Mrs. Lamp reference earlier. These close contacts exempts are specific to either the regular school day or in some cases it occurs during activities. As we've talked about before at the board level, Governor Burgum created this change to close contact, and it has had a significant impact on our school's instructional plan as we've made decisions. More students are now able to continue to attend school. More staff are able to continue working as long as they are wearing masks if they are designated as a close contact exempt. One of the questions I've gotten quite a bit relates to the notification of close contacts. Just because they're exempt doesn't mean that they are not close contacts. It means there's a separate designation that allows them to come to school. So families are still notified of a close contact. As a family, you're going to want to make different choices if you're a close contact, and the exempt status doesn't change that. And so we still provide that letter of notification. The letter just looks somewhat different. It tells them that they are able to come to school and the date at which they're no longer a close contact. This change was made from the governor's office because, consistent with what we're seeing in JPS data, students were not developing COVID while they were in close contact quarantine. And that is pretty consistent with what we've seen as well. The household contacts are those staff or students who are not in school because somebody in the home is a positive case. These are all out-of-school contacts. While they're not related to school, we track them because there's an absence. There's an absence from a staff or an absence from a student, and it's related to COVID. And so we need to track that data to make sure that we understand what we're actually seeing in the school setting. I'll point out, if you look at the left-hand side, for the regular in-school staff, we just listed as quarantine. Much smaller N size. We want to be sure to maintain privacy. And really the important information on that is that is a staff member that's not in school. Whether it's a household contact or an out-of-school contact, it really doesn't make a difference. So we list them as quarantine only. And like I said, sometimes we have one or we have two, and we want to be able to maintain the privacy. So we just list it as quarantine. So the total out-of-school category, which is the highlighted red box there, that is the total of positives, close contacts, quarantines, and household contacts. As I said before, in many instances, these are not necessarily directly related to what occurs at school. They're just a total of staff and students that are not in attendance, and it's a direct relation to the virus. So during the school day, again, I would reference the video, the 10-minute video that I recorded related to the investigatory process. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I would encourage you to look at that so you see the robustness of the data. But we do collect data specifically related to if it occurs during the school day. So this represents that. If it's a close contact or a close contact exempt, if it occurred during the school day is typically what it is. It does not include after-school activities or what occurs outside of the school day. It's just inside the school day. The estimate from activities is number of positives, close contacts, whether they're quarantine or exempt, that we estimate are directly related to activities. We can't directly state, yes, we believe this is an activity, yes, but we estimate, we have a pretty good sense based on the investigations that we do that we can see where that comes from. And so we take an estimate from activities. We track them separately because, number one, they're an optional activity. Number two, the rules and the regulations are different than what occurs during the regular school day. Oftentimes involved in high impact activities, so they can't wear masks. We follow those activities guidelines. You're not going to maintain 6-foot distancing in athletic competitions. It's not possible to do that. And so we track them differently because those are different activities. I will say that we see pretty clearly that there is a greater impact in activities as opposed to the regular school day. I don't think that's a surprise. I think that's what people would expect to see because there's different guidelines in place. But we think that's important, and we track it differently. The last one, and I think for many, the most important piece of data, or at least one of the most important pieces of data, is the presumed in-school transmission. The other sets of data that I've shown are all snapshots of one day. So we know as of November 9th at 7 a.m., that's what you see in a snapshot of today at 7 a.m. The presumed in-school transmission, that's a total from the beginning of the year. That's what we're estimating that we believe to be in-school transmission from the first day of school till right now at 7 a.m. Okay? So that's the only set of data that's different than the snapshot of time. So I highlighted it, put it a little bit differently. So I've referenced before that this is data that we share for information. We want our community, it's one of the things we've heard from our community. We need a little bit people want to feel that the data is more available, that it's transparent. And so it was important for us to share this information, but we want to do it in a way that we can ensure privacy. As I referenced, we have to protect individual privacy. So we collect it and share it at the aggregate level. We don't drill down to the building. We keep that. Our instructional plan review team looks at that down to the building level. What we share is at the building level, and the reason we do that is to protect privacy. So here's our staff data as of this morning at 7 a.m. So out of 353 regular staff, we have 5 staff members that are out due to positive tests, and then an additional 14 that are in quarantine due to household contact or close contact. So this means that 19 of our staff are out of school currently, directly related to COVID. I will say that is not all staff that's out. That's staff that are in one of those designations. We certainly see a lot more impact related to people that are symptomatic, people that are out, and it creates a significant burden on our staff and on our buildings. So I would look at that 19 and say that's directly related to COVID. That's the data we collect, but it's a bigger number than that. And I think we all need to be aware of the impact that has on our teachers and our classrooms and our students and our administrators. So these close contacts include regular staff that are involved in coaching and advising in activities. So that's 2 staff have been determined to be in close contact during the school day. The presumed in-school transmission, so from the beginning of the year to now, is 0, and that's great news. We don't believe that any staff member has become positive due to transmission during the regular school day since the beginning of the year. And I will say, as a note, as I've said a few times, this does not include activities. That's a different set of criteria, different set of regulations and expectations. So just think about those differently. So our student data, we have 2,104 students represented, and there are currently 26 that are identified as positive and not in attendance. And again, I'll reference that means total. That is not necessarily those. Some of those students have never been to school in that exposure window. So an additional 121 students have been identified as household contacts. In terms of close contacts, we have 128 identified as close contacts in quarantine, and an additional 96 are in exempt status who are able to continue to attend school. The vast majority, about 64% of this impact is occurring outside of the school day. Inside of school, we're seeing almost exclusively close contacts related to positives occurring outside of school. So 15% of that impact is estimated to have occurred during activities, which is outside of the regular day. As I said before, this includes all of those positive quarantines and then close contact exempts. So the presumed in-school transmission from the beginning of the year is 2. We added one this weekend that we felt we could reasonably say we believe is connected. But I will say that there's still no known transmissions that we believe are from traditional classroom settings. They are outside of traditional classroom settings. Again, I don't want to violate any individual privacy but in a traditional world history classroom, we still see no transmission in that setting. They're either high impact settings or in a non-traditional classroom. The takeaways I see from this, I think it's reasonable to say that based on that transmission rate, school is a safe place for our staff and students to be. While we're seeing escalated cases, they aren't a result of being in the school setting. It's a result of the community at large and what we're seeing there. We are a mirror of our community. What we see in the community is to some degree what we're going to see in school. We see far lower positive numbers among students at the elementary level. And I think it's easy to look at that and say, well, they're smaller students. There's not the mobility that we see at the middle school and the high school, so that's why it is. I think that's a piece of it, but I think there's more than that. We're not seeing significant transmission at any level of school. So I would presume that activities are a bigger factor into that number. And then just the idea that as students get older, they become more independent and they want to do more things outside of their family unit, and they are exposed in other ways outside of the school setting. So I would suggest that activities and more independent activities outside of school are bigger factors for those secondary students. Even though students and staff are not getting sick in school, I think as a board you need to think about the bigger impact being attendance. I referenced in the numbers earlier that 11.5 or about 11.5% of students are out of school due to COVID. That is already significantly higher than what we see in a normal year. And I think that you can add, you remember I talked earlier with the staff, what we see at the staff level and staff out, that's only a piece of it. You know, others are out being symptomatic, or they're waiting to get tested, or they're just being additionally cautious because that's what we've asked them to do, is not come to school sick. Students are the same way. That's a tip. That's part of it. But the other piece, we've estimated that about 10 to 15% beyond that 11.5% are out for all of those reasons I mentioned, whether they are symptomatic and just staying home because that's what we asked them to do, or they're being tested, they're just being extra cautious, that somebody at home is not feeling great, so they're holding their kids home, again, which they should do and which we asked them to do. But that creates a really significant burden for our teachers, and I want to be sure that our board understands that there is a significant problem with that, as we try to provide a quality education for students in the classroom, but also for those that aren't with us. This isn't like a traditional year when students are gone for a couple of days and then they come back. They're gone for multiple weeks. As long as 24 days in a household contact, that's a significant amount of time that creates a huge burden for our teachers. As we transition to the middle level to be full-time a few weeks ago, we've really started to see that impact for our teachers, and you need to be aware of it. We have to talk about all of these pieces together and not just talk health and safety, not just because school we know is a safe place to be. But there's also the attendance pieces and the extra burden that we place on teachers. We have to be considerate of that as well. Activities have a big impact, but participation in those is optional. I think it's important that we share that information so families can make reasonable decisions if that's what they want to do or not. But activities play a really important role for our kids. They provide an outlet for physical health. They provide an outlet for mental health. And because we see a higher impact, because it's optional, I don't want people to feel like I am suggesting we should not have those. I think they play an important role for kids, and I think as long as that ability exists for us to offer, I think we should allow families to make that choice and say this is for me or this isn't for me and for my family. But they play a really crucial role. But we want people to walk into those knowing, eyes wide open, this is what happens. I might have a greater impact if my student is in activities. We don't see the same impact as the community or county, but we're still impacted. As the community continues to escalate, the impact that we see, even though it's not as great, still continues to exist. We've been able to keep our kids and our staff safe, but that's going to become harder if as a community we don't have a concerted effort around all of those strategies that we know to be effective. We need a partnership. I've said this a few different times, but we need a partnership within our community to say, we're going to address these issues so we can move forward and have things like full day, everyday school. That's what we want. That's what our goal has always been, to get back to that point. But we have to do it in concert with our community. We don't exist in a vacuum, so we can't continue to do that. As our attendance rates drop, it's going to be harder and harder for our teachers. As I referenced before, even if they're not getting sick, they're not in school. This is a trend that we need to continue to monitor, and it's one that I'm concerned about. And we need to be able to react to it well. Our instructional plan review team continues to meet, and we will meet and review data. So any recommendations, like we're doing tonight, will come directly to the school board for approval before it's implemented. I referenced before our update center, and that's going to continue to be updated as we have more information, like the videos that we posted last week and this morning, that we ask that people continue to look at, because that's where that's where to go if you have questions about any communications that we've sent out. So the recommendations and then some rationale from the instructional plan review team. At the elementary level, continue with 5 days of instruction the team talked about. We aren't seeing spread. And we believe that school is the safest place for our staff and students. We're seeing the highest number of household contacts at this level, but also the lowest number of positive cases. Some of that, as I said before, is related to classroom and building size, but probably more related to activities and outside of school independence. The impact has followed similar trends, but because the classrooms are mostly self-contained, the absences in these buildings don't have what I call the multiplier effect, impacting multiple teachers each day. There is a custodial responsibility that we talked about a lot when we began this conversation in July, and I think that we need to continue to consider that to be a point at the K-5 level as well. I wanted to reach out and thank all of our elementary staff and our administrators for the excellent work at the elementary level, what they've been doing all year. They've been at full face-to-face since the very beginning of the year, and they've done a wonderful job. And it's in large part to the work that they've done implementing strategies with fidelity that we've been able to see these limited impacts despite being full 5 days of instruction since the beginning of the year. So in terms of the middle school and high school, the recommendation of the team is to move to face-to-face 4 days per week, Monday through Thursday, with Friday as a virtual instruction day beginning on November 16th. The rationale, there's limited spread, 2 days, two since the beginning of the school year. And note those were in those non-traditional classrooms that I referenced earlier. So school continues to be the safest place for staff and students. Friday would be an educational day, but it would encompass virtual assignments as opposed to face-to-face instruction. Fridays would be used for in-person supports as necessary. We do that now on Wednesdays in the hybrid. We see hundreds of students that come in and take advantage of those supports every week. This allows for a better environmental cleaning with a limited capacity in the building at that time. So the teachers that we're seeing at the middle level and high school are seeing upwards of 30% of students absent throughout their day right now. I'll give you an example. I selected 5 random teachers at the middle level today. They had a collective average of 27% of students out today. So it's an average of 29 students per teacher per day, and an average of those 5 teachers. So some might be more, some might be a little bit less, but I think that gives you a good idea. And just as importantly, a 4-day week would most easily accommodate a move to any other instructional plan, whether that's a return to hybrid and becoming more restrictive because that's what our data shows us, or a transition to 5 days per week because that's what our data shows us. As I said before, we're seeing an impact of activities at this level, but recommendation is as long as we'll just continue to follow guidance. If that changes and we're not allowed to provide activities, then we would no longer provide activities, but as long as we are, I think they play an important role and we want to continue to offer them. And I will say this also with our secondary staff, we're really in a place to do this because of the great work that our staff and our building administrators have done. We've seen the impact of moving to 5 days at the middle level and the additional work burden that it has provided to the middle level teachers. I referenced that data a little bit earlier. We feel like the best solution is this for now. As always, as I referenced before, our goal is to come back full 5 days instruction when the conditions allow that. But we do believe that students, it's best for their education and it's best for their health and safety to be in a place for 4 days per week. A few other things, community considerations. I understand and respect what I've called the pandemic fatigue that we're all seeing. All stakeholders and decision makers, we all feel the same. Everybody's doing their best and everybody has the best of intentions. This isn't about if you feel like we should be more restrictive. That doesn't mean that you don't care about education, and it doesn't mean that you want to do less work. It means that you see this problem one way. And it doesn't mean that if you feel like you want to come back to school, you don't care about kids or care about teachers and what's healthiest and safest. It means that we've got to find a common ground. And what I implore people to understand is that everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to have a position that wants to transition back to full day education. That's what everybody wants. We're just all at different places as far as how can we get there. And I don't want to see any more discussion on social media where we're talking about one side or the other being right or wrong. We're all shades, we're all living in the gray here. And we're all trying to do the absolute best that we can. And I don't like to see us as a community fixating on one side or the other. This is really about us trying to figure it out together. And so I implore us as a community, as an institution, to understand that. We're all trying to do the best that we can here. I think everybody needs to thank their principals and thank their teachers. Everybody's under a lot of stress here. Everybody's asked to make changes to their practice that they've never done before. Everybody feels like a first-year educator. What makes teachers different and what makes building principals different is they're responsible for health and safety of 2,100 kids in an environment that's unique within our community. It's a really big undertaking, and they've done it with such grace and such professionalism. I want to respect the work that they've done. And so please take some time to thank your teachers and thank your principals. They've done a fantastic job, and we appreciate them very much. We need to have, as I've referenced a number of times, continued support in our community. Even if we're safe, this plan is still predicated upon attendance. Kids have to be in school for them to learn. We have to do a better job as a community to get us to that point where more kids are not in household contacts, more kids are not in out-of-school quarantines. We have to use those strategies that we know that are effective in our community if we want to transition to less restrictive education. It's just the reality of what we do. We can believe that that works or not believe that that works, but the reality is if we don't get numbers down in our community, this is going to get harder. It's hard to look at it's hard to be an orange and say this is going to get worse, but it could. And as a community, we need to band together and say, we aren't going to allow this to get worse. We're going to move the bar to the better. Right now, we've just been allowing the bar to continue to get worse. And that's just not acceptable if we want to do things like have our kids come to school every day. Even if we're the safest place to be, we still have to have kids in school. This is really challenging, I know, when you have an approaching holiday season, but it's maybe even more important now that we think about those types of strategies and those types of small commitments we can make to making this better together. And I'll make the plug that we need the support of any individual that's willing to be a substitute teacher or support staff. Our ability to provide the best education we can is contingent upon having people in the building and having those staff that are willing, or having those substitutes that are able to fill in when somebody is a close contact, when somebody is out of school. We simply need help. If you have interest or a willingness, contact central office and we will do whatever we can to get you in a classroom to support so we can continue to do our work. But we can't do it right now without a little bit more help. We have, I referenced before, 19 teachers out. There's a lot more out. Those are just the ones out that we're tracking on related to this pandemic. It's far more than that, and that's an area we need significant amount of help. So with that, I'm going to pause for questions because I do think that we have some other changes to our health and safety plan that I want to go through as well, but I want to pause for some questions first.
Any questions for Rob right now, or?
No questions?
Jason?
I may have missed it in the middle high school proposal for 4 days a week. That would be 7 period days.
So the schedule is an administrative function. They'd have to look at what's best in their environment. They all have, the administrators would look at what works best. As you look to continue this semester, they're likely going to say, go back to their staffs and say, well, what makes the most sense for us right now is to continue through to the semester. But I think we need to remember that those are administrative functions. They know best what works in their buildings and for their students and for their staff. But that's sort of a separate issue than talking about the instructional plan.
Aaron?
So for those of us who aren't teachers, could you just kind of elaborate on the burden on the teachers that comes about as a result of the absences that you're seeing?
Well, if I'm a classroom teacher, and just for the sake of example, say I'm an 8th grade science teacher, and I see 29 kids out in that day, that's every day. In an elementary classroom, the impact is less in terms of, even if you have more preps, and I think it skews a little bit more at the elementary level because you have 24 students that you see. Some weeks you might not have impact to COVID, and some weeks you're going to have impact with students that are out on quarantine, for example, or students that are positive. And so during those weeks, it's an extra burden, and it's 7 preps, so it's a significant amount of time. And I'm not trying to minimize the impact at the elementary level, but it's a smaller set of students. When you're seeing a middle school or high school student, or staff, that's 100, 125, 130 students that they see every day, and that's constant. There's always somebody in that classroom that is gone. And so that 29, for example, that's going to be pretty consistent every day, every week. And in an elementary classroom, it skews a little bit more. You might have some impact some weeks and not as much impact the other. I'm not at all trying to say it's not a troubling time as an elementary teacher when when students are gone, it's just not, it ebbs and flows a little bit more. So I would need to, as a classroom teacher, prep to have those students gone, get that material to them. When it comes back, I need to grade it. And so it's a pretty significant time burden, and that's why looking at that additional day would provide them, the students see the virtual education or virtual instruction, the assignments that they need to do to support the classroom work, and then the teacher would also have that additional time to prepare for those students that are out of the classroom. And it's just a higher volume.
Any other questions on that? None? Okay, moving on to the health and safety plan.
Okay, so let me get out of this and into this.
Your mic's on.
Thank you. So I have some pages, I'm going to go through every page, and this is based on the recommendation that the instructional plan team is making. Some of the changes, like the pages that are listed there, are pretty minor. It's a verbiage change, a date change, what I would consider to be pretty minor changes, and some are a little bit more substantive that help us clean up things as we've gone along this year. We know that the plan we created in July has had to shift, and we've pivoted a little bit, so we've had to make some change there. Excuse me, so those substantive changes I'll go over. So that's just a date that's proposed. This just adds, this is one of the minor changes, just adding the fact that we'll review the plan and make recommendations to the board as necessary in the timeline. In page 3, I just added the instructional plan review team to communications, pretty minor change. And all of these are highlighted, by the way, so if you see a change, it's highlighted. This adds the school board in the decision making, and it also clarifies that that the district may make a building more restrictive or less restrictive based on the impact at that specific building level. Okay, so we might say, for example, the board might say, hey, we're in our county is in yellow, we're in instructional plan 2, but we may make a decision that says at this building, because of what we're seeing right now, this group is virtual for 14 days. That's what this allows us to do. Or we aren't seeing the same impact, and we want to be less restrictive in this particular building. Okay, that's all that is saying. It just clears up what was in there before. Instructional plan designs to make this happen. We don't have a 4-day, 1-day plan. And so what I've done is, in the past we had 4 plans. In this one we would have 5. What this plan would be is would now be instructional plan 2. Instructional plan 2 would be instructional plan 3, 4, and 5 would be the same. So it just adds the 4 days on, Fridays a virtual day to allow for online instruction and assignments, and the in-person supports on Fridays. So that would add instructional 2. This clarifies, I had a lot of questions about the language that was in here. It said before anticipated plans. And that created a lot of questions and misunderstandings about what was intended. We never intended to say these are the only plans that can be done in blue and green and the only plans that can be done in yellow. It was to give an anticipated. Based on the beginning of the year when we made this plan, we knew it would be fluid. We wanted to give people an idea of what we would likely see at those different risk designations. And as the close contact rules changed, that changed too. And so we had a better comfort with being in yellow, and for example, and transitioning into full face-to-face instruction. So a lot of questions we got about that, and saying, well, your plan says you're anticipated to be here, and so we just want to make sure that it says instructional plans are determined based on current conditions instead of trying to anticipate. And I think people have a pretty good idea of what those plans are now. So I think that we can be a little more flexible with that language. The only change I did here is that this modified AB, it used to be JHS's Plan 3, now it would just be Plan 4. The Virtual Academy, we've talked in the boardroom about the Virtual Academy, in that we did open it up for students to leave, come back to traditional education earlier. This language changes that to make to state that unless it's otherwise determined it would be the semester, we determined it would be open. And to clarify that we're providing a second window for those that are considering the virtual academy in December, to make sure that if the direction the district is going and they want to move into virtual, that we would allow that for the second semester. But just to clarify that in the plan that that's our intention. So we have had questions about those wishing to, if they haven't looked at, taken advantage of those windows when they were open, what might happen to join into the academy. And this clarifies that we would look at that if they could provide the building principal with medical documentation that necessitates consideration for a change. And we'll also walk through that child's virtual academy readiness using that rubric that we've used. The principal will make a recommendation to me. I'll make a final determination if we want to allow a midstream change there. So there's an option for people outside of those two windows, the August window and the December window. This just clarifies the instructional plan that the instructional plan review team meets, assesses the current instructional plan, and then makes a recommendation to the board for formal approval. In the past, prior to last meeting, that happened at the plan team level. Now that happens at the board level. This, in the PPE guidance, we changed this to include all of the phase designations, the risk designation level. So it's either this is how we operate in green, blue in terms of our operational guidance, and this is how we operate in yellow, orange, and red. We have had a question related to what happens if a student that is listed as a close contact for quarantine or a household contact still comes to school. We don't anticipate that, but based on guidance from Central Valley Health, we'll educate them in an isolated setting, similar to what we would do for a student that is exhibiting symptoms. We would educate them in that setting until their family can come and pick them up. But we don't envision that happening. We know our families are going to recognize the fact that in a close contact quarantine or a household contact recommendation, they are home, because that's where they need to be. But we did add that to the plan as well, just to make sure and clarify. And this really just outlines what we do in terms of tracking and contact tracing. It just clears the process that we use. Again, reference people if they have questions about this. There's a more detailed explanation of how this works and how we track the data on our school district's website in the update center. So going into the appendices, all this does is change a few different pieces of this. I'm not going to go through probably each one, but basically that we state the instructional plans determined based on current conditions, and that schools should be prepared to support the different models rather than saying in yellow. There's language that kind of made people think if we're in yellow, then we're going to go into this direction, and really it's about the school level data and what happens in school. What we see is going to drive the instructional plans that we choose, in not a risk designation at a county level that might, say, have a significant impact on what we're seeing outside of the school setting, maybe a care facility or something like that. So the language is just changed to be a little bit more flexible. So schools should be prepared to, if in a hybrid, in orange, red, we'll consider more restrictive instructional plans if data supports that the existing plans are increasing community spread. If our plans are increasing community spread, and continue least restrictive instructional plans if the trend data supports that schools are not contributing to spread. So again, just really focused on what we're seeing in schools. And so I just, again, adding language that if it's necessary, as opposed to stating in this color designation, we're going to go in this direction. So other than that, that's what I see for instructional plan changes that would be necessary.
Is there a motion to go ahead with those changes for the health and safety plan? Bob? Motion by Bob, second by Melissa. Any discussion? Melissa? Oh, Mike.
Clarification on if they want to go to the virtual academy, that is in there, but what if they don't qualify for the virtual academy? Is there anything in place for those families who do not wish to have their children going to school, but they don't qualify for that, going into the virtual academy in the middle of the semester?
So we would assess them based on their readiness to do that. A family would have lots of different options in terms of if home education is best for them. They would always have the window. We will have a window in December to make a choice for the second semester. But if we don't believe that they are at a successful level, it's hard for us to advocate for them to transition into something educationally that we think will be the wrong choice for them. But they would have that optional window in December. Or they could always make the choices they could always make and say that public education is not their best option.
Gail, you have a question?
I can't hear. I haven't heard anything. Cutting in and out. I don't feel like I can make a good decision without having heard this. I've been asking for help.
She got cut off in the middle. So. I will dial you back in, Gail. I didn't want to. It's loud, so I didn't want to.
I've missed so much. It's very frustrating. I'll go out and you can call me back in.
I don't know why she's cut off.
Go ahead, Heidi, what? Go.
Mr. President, you might want to just let Gail know that what we covered, the majority of it was the video presentation that was sent out, and then the few changes, so.
She's only hearing every fifth word. Why, I don't know.
Coming through which phone?
I don't know either. It kind of cut out and I tried to go back in and I didn't hear.
She was on this one for a long time, and then right in the 3/4 of the way.
Has Greg and Diane been hearing?
Greg and Diane, are you hearing fine?
Yeah, I haven't had any problem.
Okay.
Diane?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a bad connection or a bad time when we did it. There was nothing I was hearing that made that was able to get it.
Yeah. Can you put your mic on?
I just disconnected. I have a presentation about boys at 5 days, 4 and 4. And then we called again, and then after that, once we reconnected, I've been trying to message you. I can't hear you. I can't hear the board, so.
Right now, we're on the health and safety plan motion and in discussion into that, Gail.
Yeah, I guess, I had a question about the, right after the one, and now it just disconnected. So I'll try to pick up where it is, but I didn't have a chance to ask my questions or anything, so that's frustrating. I wish we could do a Zoom format or something better.
When we get back into the instructional plan, I mean, we'll have discussion there too if you want to bring it up at that time.
That I might have to bring up stuff that's old, just if you understand that.
Yeah. So, Jason?
Just to clarify, this motion is not including the recommendation from, the current recommendation for the 4-day
This is
face-to-face,
just bringing
right?
it to the board so that those recommendations come to the board and the board makes the decision.
So we're just voting to accept the changes to the plan?
Correct, yep. Aaron? Nope, okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none? Oh,
Yes, Gail here. Sorry, I would like to have you state what the motion is, so I'm up to speed.
The motion is to change to amend the health and safety plan to have the board be making the decision coming from the instructional committee.
Thank you. Now I got it.
Okay.
None of that I heard before. Thank you.
Okay. Roll call, Sally?
Greg Allen,
Yes.
Melissa Gleason, Diane Hansen,
Yes.
Roger Hout,
Yes.
Heidi Larson, Jason Rohr, Gail Nelson,
Yes.
Robert Toso, Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
Okay, moving into, is there a motion to approve the instructional plan committee recommendation going 4 days a week? Heidi?
I move that we approve the instructional plan coming from the instructional group that has reviewed the data this week.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Greg. Any discussion? Oh, Aaron? Oh, let's go Aaron, then we'll go to Gail.
So this is just a change for the middle school, is that correct?
Let's go high school.
And high school?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Gail, did you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I still have some clarifications. I know I'm getting some reports of parents. I know what we consider direct transmission, but I'm having people who are saying their kids are testing positive, and the only place their child has been in school. But if they weren't someone reported as a contact by that person who was identified or listed, they're not counting in that rate. Is that correct?
So,
get tested and they're reporting. I don't know where I get it. The only place I've been in school, but because someone didn't list them as a contact, are they counted as a school transmission?
so school transmission would be somebody that's in quarantine, that's a close contact in school, and they and they became positive. That's what we consider an in-school transmission. There's a lot of factors outside our control here. What we can control is what we investigate, and that is what happens in school. If they are in an in-school or in quarantine because of what's happened in the school setting, and they become positive, we don't control what happens outside of the school day. It's very difficult for us to say out-of-school contact, and that's why we say presumed transmission. You know, we feel very confident if it happens in school that we can say this was a school contact. Other than that, we're kind of, we're really rolling the dice here and saying, yeah, we think this one, or yeah, we think that one. That's how we know. And I think that's really important that we recognize that this is the data that we have, that we're trying to work with. And there's a lot of time outside of the day that we don't know what occurs. We know what happens. We know what occurs in school, and that's what we focus on.
I guess to follow up on my question, my concern would be is that our rise in the active rates in our school, although lower in our school, tend to mirror what's happening in our community right now as far as active positives. This week we doubled our positivity rate from 8 to 16.5, and we also doubled our active cases from, well, not quite doubled, 218 to 419. So I think we're starting to see that, reflected in our schools.
Rob?
Just a response to that. Yeah, I do understand that.
Oh. Go ahead.
Gail, go ahead. What you were talking?
That was yeah. I guess I'm done for that.
I would re-reference what I stated in my presentation earlier. We of course see the same impact. We are a mirror of our community. As cases escalate in our community, in our county, we are certainly going to see an increase. It's the degree to which we see the impact. And it is different, and we see less of an impact because we have mitigation strategies that we require to happen in school. We require that students wear masks. We have physical distancing to the degree it's possible. Those are the things that we limit large groups, again, to the degree that it's possible in this setting. We do those things with fidelity, and that's the reason why we don't see the same impact that's happening in the community. It's easy to look at the community and say, we're moving into orange, so we should do this, but we need to do the actions that we feel are supported in what we see, what our data tells us, not just what happens at the county level. And so, yes, it's going to impact us. It's just the degree to which it impacts us, and what we're doing locally to mitigate that, and looking at our 2,500 kids and staff, and how does that impact our 2,500 kids and staff.
Gail, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm still rather concerned. I've looked and looked at data that looks to say that 6 feet is not as important, and I have a lot of concerns. Right now, I suppose we're doing okay because of the large numbers we have out, either quarantine sick or isolating, that we're able to have more space in our rooms because of that. But I still have a lot of concerns. I haven't seen anywhere where they have abandoned that 6 feet guidance, even with masks. It's still the preferred, one of the preferred mitigation methods. So I just am still very concerned about that. Also, the question is, do we have anything in place? As I heard you, thank you for referencing how tough this has been on all our staff. Are we looking at any ways to support our staff as we move forward in a formal plan for their mental health as this moves forward? Just means to see if they're okay. Thanks.
Go ahead.
So a few years ago, the board was wise enough to become a part of the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. We certainly have that available for any staff that does need that. That it has lots of different areas that they can reference, not just mental health, and a number of different opportunities. And I would reference that for those that may need to access it. Related to physical distancing and 6 feet, from the onset of this plan, in any building, in any school, 6 feet distancing is going to be a significant challenge. And even at our elementary level, we haven't been able necessarily to operate with 6 feet distancing at all times. It is a goal that we seek, but it isn't something that we can do with fidelity. We do it to the degree that it's practical and possible.
Greg, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm as far as where I work, I have to monitor numbers several times daily, and with the information that's been presented, I just want to first of all commend the school for going into such detail and how they are monitoring where all this is coming from. I think that is totally amazing. And as we look at those numbers, and I look at other numbers and all kinds of numbers, it almost appears that the school is probably the safest place for some of these students. And I commend the administrators and teachers that are really being diligent in making this happen. And my only hope is that, as depending on how the vote goes tonight, if this continues, that we continue to monitor. We continue as we see the situation on the ground changes, as I'm sure you will. But it certainly appears that what's happening in our district no way mirrors what's happening in our community. And as I said at the last meeting, we have no control over the community, but I'm hoping that if some of these numbers get out, that the community will realize that the district has a good plan, and the plan is actually working, and we're seeing success. And if we can mirror that plan in the community, I think we'll be better off. Thank you.
Diane, you have a question?
I didn't have a question. I had a comment. I'd like to talk a little bit about what Greg said. I agree that we're tied to the community. We're part of the community. And I think that if we could get the community on board with the mitigation measures that we're using, we'd be in much better shape. And I would encourage the panel and the board, perhaps we can get together in some sort of format and get some ideas out there on how we are going to bring the community with us on this journey, and some creative ideas about how to impart to the community that the kids are in school because we're doing a good job, and we have to work together to keep it a good job. And I want to say one more thing. I'm crossing the United States right now, headed for the Eastern Seaboard. I'm in Indianapolis, and I have been coming through small towns, big cities, everything in between. And I was delighted, I suppose, and surprised to see that almost everyone is masked up. And I'm thinking that if we can just figure out a friendly way to get our community more involved, I think we ought to put our heads together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Bob?
I don't know how, I don't want to go too deep into this, but the resiliency dollars gives us some flexibility, and I think there's a possibility. One of the concerns we have is the amount of time teachers have to spend if they have large numbers of students out of school, that it's going to have to be beyond the 8 to 4 day. Are you looking at all at using resiliency dollars to help teachers with some paying for some extra time that they have to put in because of the issues we have with COVID?
So I'll bring a proposal at the next board meeting is what we're planning. There are a few different opportunities for staff. We haven't thought of that, but we are looking at a few different opportunities of ways that we can utilize those for staff.
Melissa?
Just a question as far as if we do see a sudden spike in the school, how quickly can we go to the online, or how quickly can we move to a different plan?
So perhaps one of the challenges of the change the board has made to bring it to the school board, it means that you need to have a special meeting. You know, in the previous iteration of the plan, the instructional plan review team could make that decision, and we could be very nimble and react to that pretty quickly. Now you'd have to schedule a special board meeting to do that, which presents some set of challenges, although certainly not insurmountable challenges. But to answer your question, if we saw data that supported a change either to be more restrictive or less restrictive, we would act on that to bring to the board pretty quickly with a recommendation that included a timeline of how quickly we felt like we could implement it based on whatever the change is. Any change we make, we have to be able to communicate the rationale, and communicate the timeline for people to expect, from staff to students. So there is a need to be as nimble as possible. So it presents some challenges for us, but like I said, they're not insurmountable ones.
Jason?
I guess for me right now, the major issue weighing on my mind is the impact this is having on our staff. And we can, and I'll be blunt, we can talk about, we're doing a phenomenal job in school, mitigating risk. At the end of the day, for me, it comes down to how much student absences, regardless of reason, is impacting education, how it's impacting our staff. And so a question I'd have would be the 4-day plan, okay? How does that address, or if not, how does that address, reducing some of that stress on staff? I guess I really didn't see a benefit, and I may have missed it. Convince me that that's the way to go right now, that we're going to hopefully keep numbers level, if not decrease, and that we're addressing some staff concerns.
So I hope to do that. The data shows that school is the safest place that our students can be, right? And so if that's the case, they could be to school 5 days a week. And our data supports that they could be to school 5 days a week. While we're suggesting that it should not be 5 days a week is because of the burden that it places on teachers. That's where that virtual day provides an opportunity for our staff to address those high volumes, those absences of students. It gives them that day without seeing student contact, although they're having, to prep for the virtual day and for those responsibilities. It provides them that additional time, like what exists in Wednesdays right now in between, to prep for those students that are gone. So it provides them non-student in-school contact time, but it also provides the school with that, like I referenced before, we have hundreds of kids taking advantage of coming into school now and getting a little bit of additional support, and that would continue. But it would give teachers, our staff, that additional time to be able to plan for what is occurring outside of their regular day. A little bit of additional prep time.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. This is to approve the instructional plan for the recommendation from the committee.
Melissa Gleason. Yes. Diane Hansen. Diane Hansen. Roger Hout.
Yes.
Heidi Larson.
Yes.
Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Gail Nelson.
No.
Robert Choso.
Yes.
Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Greg Allen.
Yes.
You want to try Diane again?
Diane Hansen. Diane. She's 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Motion passes 7-1.
Heidi? Go.
My comment was, we've approved an instructional plan now for our grade school and then our 6 through 12. I'm assuming that this in no way handicaps our superintendent and school principals if they feel that we have such a large number of staff or teachers out or something like that, that they can't make I'm assuming they can still make a decision if they need to close a school down for a period of time, which would be one school, not all the grade schools, I'm just assuming that's expected, right?
Rob?
So the way the plan is written and what the board action has been in the past, what the board action has been related to this plan and decision-making authority, I would say that to make those decisions, recommendations to come before the board again. That's how I see it occurring based on the intent of board action has been. I don't know if I would say that's the nimblest way to do that, but that's, if we would need to move a building, we would probably need to hold a special meeting based on how the direction I've been given in the past. So that's how I would see that, even though it's maybe not as efficient.
Heidi?
Then, in that case, I'd like to make a motion to add to the instructional plan that if the superintendent, in consultation with the building principal, decides that they need to close one building down for a period of time due to reasons related to COVID, absences and those types of things, that they would have the ability to do that. And my reason for that is I think we need to give our families as much notice as possible. And even if it takes a day or two to convene a board meeting, that's a couple days families are losing in time.
There's a motion. Bob?
I guess I'm making that clarification, I feel. I mean, I feel like if a building principal doesn't have enough staff, and this could happen within 12 hours' notice, and we just aren't that nimble. I don't think it's any different than if there's a water main break and a school gets closed down by the superintendent's action. I just feel like I don't want to hold them back from decisions like that for the time period of us trying to create a meeting. Again, it would be a temporary thing per building, not a change to the instructional plan, just due to what's happening in one building. We have some one-section grade schools that you take 6, 7 teachers out of that building for whatever reason it might be.
Rob?
A comment to where that might fit, that motion would fit into page 5. And you could simply change to accommodate specific circumstances within the school district and at building levels. You could say specific circumstances at individual building levels, the superintendent may, as appropriate, implement operational measures and instructional plans at a more restrictive phase for a temporary basis or on a temporary basis. I could change the language to something like that. Something specific to that.
Heidi, you want to restate your motion? Greg wants to hear it, so.
Greg, my motion was for just to allow the ability of the superintendent in consultation with the building principal to have the flexibility to close down a building if needed for a short period of time, one building level within this instructional plan without having the board convene. I don't see it any different than if a water main breaks and we have to close a building down, the superintendent has the ability now to do that. I just wanted to make that clear, I guess, and so that we're giving our families and staff ample notice rather than having to wait for a board meeting to be scheduled.
It's not putting restrictions on them, you're saying, yeah, okay. Bob?
I'll second that.
Okay. A motion and a second, any discussion? Melissa?
I don't know, I just have concern that what if every building decides to do that on the same day, and then we're back to it's out of the board's hands. I don't know how
It would be for emergency purposes only.
Okay.
I mean, if something goes array and they
Okay.
need to do something now, they have the authority to do that without coming to the board, and just for the safety of everybody.
I don't know if it would be applicable to put that they could do that as an emergency thing, but then it gets put on the agenda for the next meeting to verify that or to confirm it, maybe.
Heidi?
I guess we've had schools closed for water main breaks and other issues that's never, in all the years I've been on the board, that's never come to the board before. So I just feel like we've hired the administrators to do these types of jobs. I just want to make sure our families get enough notice rather than saying, oh, well, the board can't meet for 2 days, so you have to wait to see what we're going to do, so.
Any other discussion? Hearing, oh, go ahead.
So this is how I would change the health and safety plan based on that guidance to accommodate specific circumstances at building levels. The superintendent may, as appropriate, implement operational measures and instructional plans at a more or restrictive phase. You want to say on a temporary basis?
Any other discussion? Jason?
Sorry.
Yeah, and I would see this as an emergency for the safety of all kind of thing, as long as we keep it at that, because we don't want a bunch of kids showing up for school if there's only 2 teachers there kind of thing. Two other questions related, kind of. The decision-making, or the committee now who will be making the recommendations. First question, do you plan on meeting on a more regular basis? And number 2, did we change that committee structure now?
I don't know if you want to act on the motion or just ask a question, but I can quickly answer the question. We'll continue to meet on an as-needed basis at no less than every other week, but you would, if the need arised, we collect data every day. I look at this, I look at our tracking spreadsheet every single day as we take new kids off and take put new kids and staff back on. So we look at it every day. And the framework of the committee has not changed in the plan.
Heidi, you want to restate the motion one more time? Greg, can you hear?
Yep.
Oh, you have a question, Greg?
Yeah, just quickly. First of all, I think that's a great idea. I guess the question I would have is, and I don't think it's a question, but the administrators that are over the school, they're on the ground, they're with the teachers, they know what's happening. And in this case, if they saw any type of an emergency, like we said, we want them to make the best call possible. That's going to be the safety of the students and the staff. And so I think this is a great recommendation, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote, Sally?
Diane Hansen. How did Diane lose it again? Oh, I just called her in. Roger Hout.
Yes.
Heidi Larson. Oh, okay, Diane, thank you. Heidi Larson. Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Gail Nelson.
Yes.
Robert Toso.
Yes.
Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Greg Allen.
Yes.
And Melissa Gleason. Motion passes 9-0.
Rob, one more.
And just in the event it was missed, I just want to make sure that we clarify the changes would be in place. We followed the same November 16th date that we were talking originally about making that transition, so that would be the transition of this date as well. I think it's referenced in here somewhere. Just don't remember where.
Yeah.
But 11/16 would be the date
Okay.
of this plan change. So no change at the elementary level, that change on 11/16 at the middle level in high school.
No further business. This meeting's adjourned.